Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I had a conversation recently with a moderate Democrat, and he was completely clueless as to what was going on in his own party. In fact, Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire puts it this way. He says, "This might seem like a deep cut, like some esoteric trivia that no one would ever need to know. But it's one of the most important historical facts that you never learned in school. The Bolsheviks never won more than 30% of the vote in Russia in any election. They were never close to obtaining the support of a majority of the population. In fact, they were widely detested. As it turns out, Russians did not want to empty their bank accounts at gunpoint and transfer all of their money to the government. They didn't want the government to seize private property and arrest the clergy. They didn't want the government to take the grain from the peasants and causing mass starvation. But all of this happened anyway. Why? Because the Bolsheviks were extremely dedicated to their mission. They were well organized. They were willing to wage war to advance their ideology, while traditionalists, the supporters of the Tsar and the empire, were not. The traditionalists were growing weary of World War I. They were skeptical of the Tsar, who was spending too much time, they thought, with an Epstein-like figure named Rasputin, and they weren't energized or cohesive. So the Bolsheviks won by default. They abolished the legislature and ruled for more than 7 decades. They murdered tens of millions of people and brought economic ruin to the entire country. And they did it all with less than 30% support. None of my teachers ever taught me this, and I'm willing to bet yours didn't either. You'll learn a lot about the Nazis from the high school history teacher, but virtually nothing about the Soviets. And that's a big problem, one we're going to address here on this podcast, which focuses on Bolsheviks and their rise to power and the many, the many autocracies that they committed. So this lesson could not be more urgent now that the socialists have taken over the Democratic Party. And as you've probably seen, socialists just won a clean sweep in the New York congressional primaries, which guarantees that we'll have several more socialists in Congress next year. And to be clear, the majority of Americans do not support socialism. The majority of Democratic voters do not support socialism. But the socialists will win anyway, just as they did in Russia. And if Americans remain passive, if everyone assumes that someone else will take care of the problem, well, unless we treat these communists as a direct threat to the lives of every American, unless we fight them with the same fervor and commitment that they have, they will overpower us. They will do to every conservative precisely what they did to Charlie Kirk and Brian Thompson. They will exterminate their political enemies, just as the Bolsheviks did. And then they'll plunder the country until there's nothing left. The turnout in the primary elections in New York was less than 15%. That was it, just 15%. In the primary for the New York's 13th congressional district, which has a population of 750,000, only 66,000 votes were cast in total. And of those 66,000 votes, only 33,000 went to the winner, Chevalier. That's the Mondami-backed socialist whose platform explicitly is to destroy Western civilization. I mean, truly, and that's not hyperbole. It's literally pulled from the Instagram account of the student group she founded, called Columbia University Apartheid and Divest. Quote, "We are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. Our intifada is an internationalist one, as the fascism ingrained in the American consciousness becomes even more explicit and irrefutable. We seek community and instruction from militants in the global South." Unquote. Gone are the days when New Yorkers and their leaders would seek guidance from men like George Kelly and James Wilson, the academics who, of course, pioneered the broken windows approach to law enforcement. And today, New York's leaders are soliciting lessons from warlords in Africa and Latin America and other renowned experts in killing white people. This is now the dominant, controlling ideology of the Democratic Party. If you vote for Democrats for any reason, in any context, you are supporting a communist takeover of the United States. Already, party elites are capitulating to these Bolsheviks, hoping it might buy them a few more years in office. The leaders of the Democratic Party have already ceded power to the communists. In response to a former DNC chair who said these candidates are terrible for the party, here's what Chris Murphy, the powerful senator from Connecticut, wrote on social media. He said, "I don't know, man, who is the Democratic Party if it's not the voters. Democratic voters choose candidates, not party leaders. And party leaders need to listen to what voters are telling us. And right now, they are demanding our party be bolder." So there it is. This is capitulation. These communists are not demanding that Democrats be bolder. They're demanding the end of capitalism and Western civilization itself. There's a big difference there, and Chris Murphy knows it. But he's too cowardly to stand up and risk his political career, or perhaps his life, given how insane these people are, in order to defend the United States from these communists. This is exactly how trans ideology took hold as well. Every sane person understands that men can't transform into women and that boys can't transform into girls. But trans activists were so aggressive and so violent that they successfully browbeat the entire party into submission, to the point that Democrats' presidential nominee in the last election appeared on camera in front of a national audience to declare she supported taxpayer-funded sex changes for illegal immigrants in prison. A proposal so demented that it seems like it was designed in a lab to be the single most indefensible policy position imaginable. But Democrats and a lot of so-called moderates who were terrified of being called transphobic went along with this fraud of at the highest level. And if you're tempted to think I'm overstating the case here, and that the rise of socialism is confined to the coasts, go take a look at the footage out in Idaho from a few weeks ago. The Party for Socialism and Liberation organized a school walkout over ICE, and hundreds of furious children showed up, demanding an end to immigration enforcement in the United States. Again, this isn't New York. It's not California. It's Idaho. Surveys show that Democrats under 50 prefer socialism by an 80-13 margin. Overall, the party prefers socialism to capitalism by a 68-20 margin. These are numbers that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, and Gallup has similar numbers. In response to these polls, a lot of people will say that the system has failed. Affording a home has become a challenge. Getting a job has become more difficult, and all of those trends are real. We've talked about them before. That's not to say we're doing poorly, relative to other countries. Our quality of life is much higher than in Canada, Mexico, or the UK. Our economy has been growing consistently for a very long time, while those economies have stagnated. The average American today enjoys luxuries that would have been hard to comprehend just a few years ago. Everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket, for example. And at the same time, obviously, we could be doing better. But let's be very clear about this. If your situation to our problems is to embrace socialism, then you are historically illiterate and intelligent and dangerous. And if you want government bureaucrats to run the economy just like they run the DMV, well, then you are so ignorant and so moronic, if not simply evil, that you are a threat to everyone around you. You should be deported immediately. You don't belong here. And he says, even if you buy the idea that things were vastly better 30 or 40 years ago, even though in many ways they were not, you still don't come anywhere close to justifying socialism. After all, we didn't have socialism 30 to 40 years ago either. And the only countries that have tried socialism have inflicted unimaginable suffering on millions of people for the obvious reason that free markets are they're just a much better way of distributing resources than retarded government bureaucrats who don't have an incentive to do anything correctly. Nevertheless, on CNN, Democrat strategists are now talking about how to spread socialism across the country. Yeah, they say it's part of a building a big tent party, which is a term that used to mean appealing to moderates. Now, in the eyes of the Democratic Party, the tent needs to include people that want to burn the tent down and kill everybody inside.
What's next? How do you grow the ideals, particularly behind the democratic socialism, beyond New York City and other deep blue cities? I mean, we've seen it here in D.C. and in Seattle, but how do you get beyond that?
I mean, to me, this is less about any specific label and more about a fundamental question of who is our government going to work for and does it work? And I think right now the answer is our government does not work, and our government works for the wealthy and the well-connected, for lobbyists, for those with the money to buy power. And it doesn't work for anyone else. And we need to change that. And New York City DSA had an incredible night last night, slates of candidates across the city winning. There are a lot of other places where you're seeing similar things, but I think it's not restricted to any one label. And we talk a lot about the party being a big tent party, and we should be. I think the question is, what is that tent going to be? And can it be united around the affordability crisis and taking on corruption?
Again, he's a very weak, passive man who is probably not a communist himself. He seems reasonably intelligent, but he understands that these communists are vicious. They'll shoot a father in the neck in front of millions of people because he disagreed with them. If you stand up to these demons, they might do the same thing to you. So it's just best to go on CNN and talk about the big tent and let these communists do whatever they want. And that's the official position of the Democratic Party at this point. Even Ro Khanna, one of the most powerful and dishonest Democrats in Congress, reacted to the primaries on Tuesday. Ro Khanna is talked about, he talks about the oligarchs as if he isn't one. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, thanks largely to his marriage, but he has multiple homes, each worth well over $10 million. He's allegedly one of the most prolific inside traders in Congress. By every definition, Ro Khanna is an oligarch. But he's pretending he's not in order to crusade as some kind of working class hero. This is a perfect illustration of the new socialist movement in the Democratic Party. It's driven, in large part, by wealthy people who get off on portraying themselves as commoners. It's an illness. These people have no connection to reality. In fact, here's one of their newest stars. This is Mamdani, an endorsed socialist, Daraliza Chevalier, whom we talked about earlier. Let's check in on her logical reasoning capabilities, shall we?
I want to still ask about two tweets specifically because I think they are relevant to the race. The first is all deportation is wrong. Now, in Congress, obviously, that comes with a lot of questions about immigration enforcement. And even as Democrats might agree with calls that you have shared to things like abolish ICE, I don't know if they're necessarily there on things like all deportation is wrong. Is that something you still believe?
That phrase, yes. I still believe that all deportations are wrong.
And even if we're talking about illegal entry to the country or someone who may have committed a crime?
So when we're talking about things like illegal entry, we're actually talking about administrative law, right? We're not talking about criminal law.
Let me concede the question of people who have not committed a crime, because I think that that's not really the question here. Like, if we're saying all deportation is wrong, though, that would seem to also include people who were convicted of breaking U.S. criminal law. Is the deportation of those people wrong?
Yes, and the reason I say that is because we have a criminal system. It is imperfect, but it exists. And it is one that if we accept as the process by which we want to engage with these issues, right? The issues of harm, issues of criminality, what have you, then we need to make sure that it is one that isn't also discriminatory on the basis of where people were born, right? To subject someone who has committed a crime to both a criminal system and then additionally to an immigration system that also detains them in the very same facilities that people who are convicted of criminal convictions are also held, right? And then deported and ripped away from everything they know and love. That is also punishment. And that is punishment not on the basis of the crime they committed, because they already served their time when they were processed in the criminal system. It is double punishment. And if we truly believe that double jeopardy is something that is unconstitutional, something that is unethical, something that is against the principles of equality in this country, we cannot subject people to that on the basis of where they were born.
Wow. I don't think I've seen a worse misunderstanding of the concept of double jeopardy since that awful 1999 film starring Ashley Judd. No, deporting someone who's arrested for committing a crime is not double jeopardy. That's just called enforcing the law. It's what happens when you commit two crimes. You get punished for both of them, not just one of them. If you're arrested for bank robbery and you happen to be an illegal alien, then you have to serve your time for bank robbery, offense number 1. And then you get deported for being in the country illegally, which of course is offense number 2. And yes, under our criminal law, 8 U.S. Code section 1325, unauthorized entry by a foreign national is indeed a federal crime, punishable by imprisonment. It's not an administrative issue, as she likes to put it. It's a violation of federal criminal law. This is one of those lies that leftists constantly repeat, even though anyone with Google can debunk it. Of course, she doesn't really care about double jeopardy, which is a product of her feverish imagination anyway. She has no idea what she's talking about, and she certainly doesn't care about the law. Quote, all deportation is wrong? The United States can't have borders anymore. We're were open to everyone, a total insane policy that she would immediately abandon if a high, proportion of illegal immigrants were white males, let's say. And she also believes that everyone in the United States is entitled to free healthcare, free housing, universal basic income, free preschool, and free everything. So how does that work exactly? How do you have a welfare state, the most generous welfare state that has ever existed, along with open borders? Who's going to pay for the tens of millions of people who will walk into the country under this system of government? Did anyone who voted for the 19th Amendment ever imagine in a million years that we'd have to deal with candidates like this? Part of the response has been to train our focus on the issues that actually matter to this country and its peoples. He says, I received this response the other day to my post that declared war on third world communism in this country. And here it says, AIPAC gets wrecked in New York City, and Matt Walsh caps in to try to reframe it in some race war terms. He plays this game where he's critical of Netanyahu, but when it matters, he does the thing most helpful to Netanyahu. Well, in other words, if you care about the fact that communists are winning elections in our biggest city and how they're talking about nationalizing the airlines and destroying the economy, then you're basically an agent of Israel. That's what this guy is unironically claiming. And he's not alone. The more we tolerate this brain rot, the worse it gets. And he says, I don't give a damn about Netanyahu. The idea that American citizens who oppose the election of third world communists are somehow helping Netanyahu is so delusional and insane it passes for a mere retarded talking point into full-blown schizophrenia. These people are Israel first from the other direction. McCarthy was right. McCarthyism was fully justified. And we need a new wave of it. If we don't want to end up exactly like the Soviet Union did, McCarthy helped save us from going down this direction in the 1950s. And by following his lead, we can do it again. We can wage a war on third world communism and destroy anyone who subscribes to this ideology. And that's what's necessary at this point. One of the things you'll see when he comes out with his real history is that the revolution starts in major cities, particularly in universities. The Bolsheviks actually co-opted an unrelated university protest, which erupted after the students were told to stop partying too hard, essentially. And the Bolsheviks, very cleverly, manipulated the students into joining their movement. They knew that the students were wrong, dumb, and angry, and therefore very easy to manipulate. It's a remarkable story, and it's very similar to what's happening on college campuses today. Students are upset about Gaza or whatever, which has no relevance to this country, but the communists are savvy. They know they can take that anger and channel it into something much more destructive, something that advances the interests of the communists. That's exactly what they're doing and what we're seeing now. And just like the Russians in the 1900s, most Americans are passively watching the Bolsheviks rack up victory after victory. The opposition, once again, is too disorganized and too cowardly to do anything about the march of communism, even though the communists are outnumbered. We should be encouraged by the story of those Antifa terrorists who just received massive prison sentences in Texas. They shot a police officer in the neck as part of a massive coordinated assault on an immigration facility. The ringleader will be in prison for the next 100 years as a result. That's a start, and we need to see much more of it. Every single communist who commits a crime of any kind should receive a similar sentence, and every communist who openly declares his hatred of the United States or who conspires to defraud this country should be forcibly deported. We became a much stronger country as a result of our last major crackdown on communists all those decades ago. Before another one of these communists wins another election in which almost no one voted, we must heed the lesson of history, both our history and the history of the fall of the Russian Empire, and declare a full-scale and unapologetic war on communism while we still have the chance to win it. And I like what Chloe Trapanado, also of the Daily Wire, in her opinion piece, and what she said on the issue. She says, it's 1917 all over again. Some communists weren't communist enough, so the truly radical ones ate them alive. This time, it's not the Bolsheviks destroying the Mensheviks, it's the socialists destroying the Democrats. And the organization leading the charge isn't marching under a red flag, it's marching under a donkey. Meet the Democratic Socialists of America. Their mission is to hollow out a country they are convinced is the root of all genocide, poverty, and malfeasance in the world, and replace it with third worldist, communist radicalism that leaves the United States in a permanent dump, basically, is what she's saying. And that's brutal, right? I mean, to prevent that very bleak reality, we need to understand what the DSA is and why it is the antithesis of America. The DSA is the largest explicitly socialist organization in the United States, with over 100,000 members and chapters across nearly all 50 states. They use young people, TikTok, and apathetic voters to propel obscure candidates to victory and make themselves look more mainstream than they are. They're a radical, multi-tendency activist organization that runs carefully recruited candidates exclusively as Democrats, while simultaneously pushing campus radicalism, street organizing, and a platform of democratic socialism, which is a fancy new way of saying communism. They want to replace capitalism with top-down government control over private property and housing and healthcare and energy and more. Democratic policies aren't radical enough for them. The Democratic Party is simply the vehicle they're using to Trojan horse their revolution through. We know this because their leaders are saying it openly. The New York City DSA co-chair, his name is Gustavo Gordillo. He recently boasted that the group needs to turn DSA into a factory and admitted their alliance with the Democratic Party is more for a ballot access vehicle, not because they share its goals. Most of them, in fact, detest the Democratic Party. They compete in Democratic primaries, make their liberal opponents look like MAGA cavemen by comparison, get elected with a D next to their name, and then treat the Democratic establishment as an obstacle to be discarded. Never a home, always a beachhead. It's a classic entryism or dirty break strategy. Infiltrate the larger party, use its infrastructure and ballot access to grow, and then fracture from within. They aren't hiding it. It's no wonder they idolize Vladimir Lenin. The long-term plan may seem far-fetched, but its seeds are already sprouting. The DSA started with the squad, AOC and Rashid Tlaib and the usual suspects. Then they expanded to the New York City mayoral race in Mamdani, the communist terror sympathizer who recently declared these were not just victories from one elected office, they were victories of a moment. And he's right. That's exactly the point. The blueprint is, methodical. Start small in winnable local and state races, build name recognition and infrastructure, primary moderate Democrats, shift the Overton window left on wealth distribution and housing and policing, immigration and foreign policy, hating Israel, and eventually capture even leverage inside the Democratic Party to make it fully functioning vehicle for the socialist priorities. They will do this for as long as it takes. Their stamina outlasts your attention span. They can sustain it because their promises will never go out of style. Free housing, abolish police, healthcare is a human right. It's not, but make no mistake, the only way to fulfill those promises is to seize the means of production, tax your ideas and innovation into the ground, and handicap the creative, the strong, and the successful in the name of forced equity. Yeah. Vogt wrote about where that leads in 1961. Venezuela lived it more recently, and the DSA is apparently unaware of either. And in the meantime, the mask slips. At a DSA socialism conference, a panelist openly declared, quote, "I want to perform abortions in a church before it's all said and done," unquote. Yeah, this came from a panel on the left and the family, which also featured arguments for abolishing the nuclear family and placing children under state supervision rather than with parents, and celebrating sex work. Separately, DSA members have stated, quote, "It should not be controversial to say death to the U.S. empire. This should be the moderate position, and we need to orient ourselves toward insurrection." So yes, these people exist. They are organized. And while you're watching, Love Island and going on, matcha dates or something, they are winning races. And they are also the direct antithesis of everything this country was built on. America's foundation rests on individual liberty, limited government, secure property rights, free enterprise, and a civil culture rooted in Judeo-Christian tradition. The DSA's projects, collective economic control and mass redistribution, cultural radicalism targeting the family, and the deliberate erosion of American power abroad, well, this attacks every single one of those pillars. Like the Frankfurt School before them, they use American institutions as temporary hosts before they devour them from within. These are not cartoon villains in ski masks plotting, the gulags for tomorrow. They are organized, funded, patient, and growing today. They believe capitalism is immoral. It's actually the most moral economic system ever devised, but and they are doing everything in their power to kill it. The Democratic Party is just a stepping stone. The Bolsheviks didn't win because they were right. They won because nobody took them seriously until it was too late. Don't make the same mistake. I thought both of those opinion pieces were excellent and spot on, and actually I have a few more for you. So let's pick up from here on Wednesday's podcast, And I would like to hear from you on it. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. You can go to our YouTube page as well. And again, thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.